Hello, everyone. Joshua Short with you here in our newsroom. We are getting another breaking news update we wanted to pass along to you. We want to give you some time to join us here before I read in full. I'm going to do in full read what the Elkhart County prosecutor has just updated us on. This is out of Elkhart, obviously. And so I want to make sure we have some folks joining us here. I'll wait a second before I read this entire news release. Media advisory sent from Vicki Becker's office in the last 15 minutes. This is that shooting that happened a few weeks ago, obviously. February 8th, I believe, was the date, 10 days ago in Elkhart. This would have been 17-year-old Brian Axel Ramirez Gomez, who was gunned down by an Elkhart police officer. A lot of people frustrated in the community about answers, wanting answers, not getting enough transparency. A lot of people arguing, at least to our team. And so we're going to try to provide that update to you here momentarily. I want to make sure that people who are watching us just now, joining us on Facebook, are watching as well, because I'm going to read this in its entirety, this news release. So I'm going to pause for a second here and wait for some more folks to join us. Okay, thank you. All right, everyone, so here's what we're going to do. I have a few things that I want to try to do here. There is a soundbite from the brother of the victim from last week that I'm going to eventually play. I'm also going to show you some of that scene video as well, and also video from a vigil that was held. This young man was laid to rest last week. There was a walk, peaceful walk, protest march done in this young man's honor as well. And again, there's a lot of information we don't know, but this information I'm about to read to you, I am reading for the first time. I'm going to be clear with you that I'm reading it for the first time. I can tell you that based on those who have read it in the newsroom, it appears there are still going to be a lot more questions and answers. I will say that up front. I'm going to read to you now the entire news release issued to our team from Vicki Becker's office. That is the prosecuting attorney in Elkhart County. So I'm going to read that to you right now. In accordance with the Indiana Rules of Professional Conduct, the Office of the Prosecuting Attorney is releasing the following information to address the recent publicity and false information being disseminated related to an officer-involved fatal shooting in Elkhart County last week. To those members of our community who have refrained from engaging in spreading speculative information, your willingness to allow the investigative process into the victim's death to proceed in a manner that protects the integrity and professionalism of a law enforcement investigation is truly respected and appreciated. I'm going to pause there for a second. That first part of that news release, it is defending the integrity of this investigation. That is something that I can tell you. In fact, my phone is reading a call from Elkhart. I'm going to have to take that later. So this is the information I'm going to continue to read, but I just want to, you can sense the tone of this already based on the misinformation they say that has been put out there. They want to let that be known right off the bat. I'm continue to read here. As previously indicated, within a very short time after the shooting early Sunday morning, February 8th, the Elkhart County Homicide Unit, a multi-jurisdictional investigative group of law enforcement officers specializing in death investigations in the county, investigated this event. The homicide unit utilizes numerous local, state, federal, public, and private experts as part of their investigative process as is necessary to complete their responsibilities. This process is currently underway and has been able to reliably corroborate several facts pertinent to the case. However, there are significant facts and items of evidence that are still awaiting forensic analysis that are, quote, absolutely necessary. They've emboldened that and also italicized it for the full determination of whether the shooting was justified under the law of Indiana. So as of this moment, we do not know if this shooting was justified or not. That is the important top line update we want to pass along to you. That decision has not been made yet from the prosecutor's office. We do not know if that shooting of that 17-year-old Brian Axel Ramirez Gomez is justified or not. So that is still to be determined. I will continue reading. According, the investigation is not complete, and the process must be protected to ensure all persons' rights are respected, and the investigation is not tainted any more than it already has been with, this is their words, false information that continues to spread in our community. The victim's name will not be released by that office, even though we have verified from family members the name, which is why we have been reporting it. And I want to make sure that's clear to all of our viewers. The names of individuals involved in the shooting will not be released by my office at this time, as I'm aware of threats of violence and intimidating acts that are being made to officers not even involved, as well as to the victim's family. This is wholly inappropriate and reflects a depravity of human behavior that is completely unacceptable. The victim's family should be allowed to grieve with privacy and dignity after this terrible tragedy. After meeting with them and sharing some information, there are limited facts that have been reliably established and corroborated with objective information that may be disclosed at this time to correct the false information previously publicized and encourage public safety and peace. This is now going into the narrative of what happened. Shortly after 1:30 a.m., February 8th, 2026, Officer 1, they are not naming these officers at this point in this news release. Officer 1 was driving past the area of High Dive Park Pavilion and noticed a vehicle that was running while sitting stationary in the parking lot after the park was closed. Law enforcement officers often investigate concerns about a variety of possible criminal behaviors commonly discovered in such circumstances, as well as providing aid to people in need of immediate mental health and or medical services. So this is basically, at this point, establishing cause for why this officer was involved in the first place. Continue reading. Officer 1 pulled into the lot near the suspicious vehicle and observed several individuals inside, some appearing to be minors. Officer 1 called for backup. While Officer 1 was speaking to the driver, he made additional observations prompting further investigation pursuant to Indiana law. We do not know what those observations, or in their words, additional observations, were at this point of the news release. I just want to make that clear. Officer 2 arrived to provide backup while Officer 1 continued his work. Officer 1 attempted to gather identifying info from each occupant of the vehicle, being led to believe that there were 2 individuals that were 18 and 3 individuals claiming to be juveniles, 2 male and 1 female. Officer 1 then returned to his vehicle to determine whether there were any law enforcement notifications relating to any of the occupants. Upon removing the occupants of the vehicle, one by one to ensure safety and control, the 18-year-old driver did not have any identification on him and advised not right now when asked if he had any weapons. As Officer 1 continued to remove the backseat passengers from the driver's side of the vehicle, the front seat passenger, who had previously been complying with officers' directives to keep hands visible, reached down between his legs and refused to put his hand up when ordered. The front passenger then turned, got out of the car on the passenger side, and fired a handgun. Both Officer 1 and 2 fired their respective handguns. The front passenger was fatally shot during this event. A handgun was on the ground near him. So I want to take a step back and actually say this is brand new. This is information that I do think answers some questions out there. It appears, based on the prosecutor's version of events, talking to officers, and at this stage of the investigation, obviously there is more to come in this investigation, and this shooting has not been ruled justified at this point. But this is, I think, again, we want to underscore this. It says that upon removing the occupants of the vehicle one by one, the 18-year-old driver did not have any identifying information on him. Eventually, it says the front passenger reached down between his legs, refused to put his hand up when ordered. That passenger then turned, got out of the car on the passenger's side, and fired a handgun. That is something we did not know until this moment. Now, I'm going to continue reading, but based on that alone, there are going to be questions on who fired first. That could be a part of this investigation, obviously. But that is something we did not know. Both Officer 1 and Officer 2 fired their respective handguns. The front passenger was fatally shot during this event. A handgun was on the ground near him. In less than 1 minute, additional officers started to arrive. The other people from the subject car were secured, and more responding officers approached the front passenger lying on the ground. They provided first aid until medics arrived. We did know that. No other individual had approached the front passenger or inflicted any additional injury to him after he was shot. The front passenger was transported to the hospital where he was declared deceased. During the crime scene investigation, in which crime scene specialists documented and recovered evidence, another handgun was found on the front passenger floorboard of the subject vehicle that had been modified to be fully automatic. This is what's known in the streets as a switch. So there was a switch that was seen on this firearm that was inside the vehicle. So now we're talking 2 firearms here so far, based on this news release. Although most primary interviews are now complete, investigators will continue to interview additional witnesses that may become relevant. Furthermore, as some of the witnesses originally interviewed were not forthcoming and or fully truthful in their statements, additional interviews will continue. So that, for the first time, we're seeing that so far in their investigation, they've talked to witnesses and people who have not been forthcoming. That's what that says there. A forensic autopsy was performed at Homer Stryker School of Medicine, and the investigators are awaiting the official report to determine all injuries, toxicology, cause, manner, and mechanism of death for that passenger. Those reports, for those of you who don't know, usually take about 2 to 6 months to complete. In addition, forensic firearm and tool mark analysis is underway by an outside law enforcement agency to determine the functionality of the weapons involved and compare evidence from the scene to inform investigators as to which weapons were fired or not, and if any conclusions can reasonably be drawn from that analysis. It goes on to say several audio-video recordings collected during the investigation will be forensically evaluated to inform investigators as to the events that were recorded on these videos, the timing thereof, after evaluating the frame rates, metadata, lighting effects, audio capabilities, limitations of said recordings. These type of forensic evaluations also take months. As indicated, the investigation is ongoing and numerous forensic evaluations and reports need to be done before the matter is formally presented to the Office of the Prosecuting Attorney for consideration and potential charges. When a charging decision is made, further information will be provided. At this time, no additional information will be provided. No audio, no video recordings will be released. That is a big deal for a lot of folks in Elkhart, in that community, in that neighborhood, family members as well, who probably already knew this before we did. I want to read that again. At this time, no additional information will be provided. No audio or video recordings will be released. The city of Elkhart, this continues, has shared numerous email and social media communications, as well as voicemail messages that have been received, including threats of violence toward police and the community, and demonstrating a profound amount of bias and preconceived ideas. The number of individuals that have already articulated their conclusions about whether the shooting was justified or not without having objectively credible info is dangerous to the safety of our community as a whole. As I've said before, and will continue to say, this is, again, the prosecuting attorney's words here I'm reading. A thorough and objective investigation is underway. Irresponsible social media posting, speculations, and assumptions are not evidence, nor should any reasonable person draw conclusions therefrom. Please continue to allow the investigative process to be completed without further taint, and allow the victim's family to grieve in a private and peaceful manner. That is, in full, the news release we got in that officer-involved shooting from 10 days ago. I believe it was 10 days ago, if I'm reading that right. February 8th, 2026, which killed a teen. We can tell you that based off of this, there's a lot of brand new information that we did not know before this release. So what I am going to do is take a 1-minute break here, and we will continue trying to dissect this information, but also what's next. I think a lot of people want some answers to that. I don't have those answers, but I can tell you based off of our reporting and my sources on the ground in Elkhart, there are a lot of unanswered questions still. I can tell you that here, and I can go into detail on that momentarily. All right, everybody. So I have a few things I want to show you all in terms of video. In terms of video of not the incident, obviously, but a past video from siblings, relatives of the victim, but also the only thing we've gotten on the record so far from police and from the city. I'm going to show you those videos here momentarily. Take a collective breath, everybody who may be watching this still. I want to make sure that we all are aware this investigation is ongoing. This investigation is ongoing. This investigation continues. This is just an update in this investigation. And as you know, these investigations can take a long time to wrap up. So I want to make sure that we're aware of that. I can also tell you that a couple things if you're just joining us. We've gotten this news release. This news release, 3 pages long, goes into detail goes into some detail about that officer-involved shooting from 10 days ago. I am going to tell you that, and I'm just doing this 1, 2, there are at least 4 paragraphs in this news release devoted to what they are calling widespread misinformation, rumor, preconceived notions, misconceptions. There are at least 4 paragraphs devoted to that, and that tells you at least from the perspective of the investigators in this, what they're having to deal with right now. Whether it be threats, whether it be uncertainty, whatever it may be. That is something that, for the first time, we're getting some inkling as to just how serious they're taking that. The big top line here is that based on this account of information, the big top line are 2 things. 1, there will be no video released as of this time and no new updates to be released. So there won't be any body cam video. There won't be any body worn video released. That is something that the community has been pleading for. The investigation is ongoing, and as a journalist, I can tell you that we have been in situations before where video has been put out immediately in some cases for certain investigations. Certain shooting investigations, video has been put out relatively quickly. That is not the case here. I can't go into why that is beyond what I've just told you. And that is that this investigation, according to the prosecuting attorney there, is ongoing. One of the questions that was raised late last week, when the mayor of Elkhart and the chief of police of Elkhart, they were asked, it is very difficult as a community to not dip into conjecture when there is a space of emptiness and uncertainty, or in this case, non-confirmed information. And I think one of the questions that was posed from a journalist in that room at the time was, do you blame the community for having these questions and people who may dip into the misconceptions, or in this case, untruths, as a result of there not being any information given? And that's a question that I think has no answer, has no right answer. And obviously we didn't get the answer here specifically, but I can tell you that a lot of people still have that question of if it could provide some information of fact. Should there be video out there? Should there be some video released, understanding that there is an ongoing investigation? That is, again, as a journalist, what we're hearing in this newsroom, what I'm hearing outside of this newsroom as well, on the ground in Elkhart. Several audio-video recordings were collected, but they are not going to be releasing that. This is of interest as well. What I read earlier for the first time with you was that there was a request of the driver to get out. The 18-year-old driver did not have ID on him, and he told officers not right now when asked if he had any weapons. As Officer 1 continued to remove the backseat passenger from the driver's side of the vehicle, the front seat passenger, who had been previously complying, reached down between his legs, refused to put his hands up when ordered. That passenger then turned, got out of the car on the passenger's side, and fired a gun. Both Officer 1 and 2 fired their respective guns. We do not know how many times. We also don't know who fired first. Based on this, the sequence of events based on this news release, it appears that it may have been the passenger. We can't say that for a fact because the investigation is ongoing. But a lot of people making this argument in the public, maybe video would show that. Maybe audio would depict that. We don't know, can't answer that right now. Those are the biggest things that we've gotten out of this news release. Another thing that I want to read that I think is important is how this all started. A lot of people wanted to know, why was the officer there in the first place? What did they see? Was there a law being broken? And I think that is of importance. I want to read these two paragraphs here. Shortly after 1:30 a.m., February 8th, Officer 1 was driving past the area of High Dive Park Pavilion and noticed a vehicle that was running while sitting stationary in the parking lot after the park was closed. This is when it becomes, this is obviously what law enforcement does in their words. I want to read this. Law enforcement officers often investigate concerns about a variety of possible criminal behaviors commonly discovered in such circumstances, as well as providing aid to people in need of immediate mental health and/or medical services. Officer 1 pulled into the lot near the suspicious vehicle, observed several individuals inside, some appearing to be minors. Officer 1 called for backup. While Officer 1 was speaking to the driver, he made additional observations. We don't know what those observations are, but he made additional observations prompting further investigation pursuant to Indiana law. That's when Officer 2 arrived to provide backup as Officer 1 continued his work. What that work was beyond what he was doing, we don't know. We don't know. This is, I think, the frustrating part based on what we're hearing from people in the community is, can we just see that? If you said this much, can we see that? Obviously, for obvious reasons, they are not releasing the video. Obvious reasons in their words, an investigation is ongoing. As indicated earlier at the start of this, that was my first time reading this. There have been a lot of people who have been talking about this, including the victim's family. I want to play a soundbite from the brother of that person who was shot, and I want to play that now for you so that you can hear it yourself, and then we will talk on the other side.
Brian was a bright kid. He was a member of this community. This is where he grew up. As of his cause of death, we can't really point fingers yet. We just ask and demand that the footage comes out from the car and from the vest. And until then, until justice is served, we won't be quiet. We'll keep persisting. So we ask the Indiana State Department to overtake this case and bring justice to the light.
So that was the brother of Brian Ramirez Gomez. I want to also play here what we heard late last week at that news conference held by city officials, which quite frankly did not reveal any new information. I just want to put that out there. Objectively, as a journalist, that news conference did not provide anything more than just, I think, a moment to bring some of the community members together and to talk about the fact that this would be released eventually, and this was released, which is that news release, that update, if you will, into this investigation. So I want to play a soundbite from both the mayor of that city, who's been very vocal and at least up to this point, very vocal about no one should, and I think it's fair to say that's what the prosecutor is saying as well, that this is a tragedy. And so he talked about that at that news conference, that this is a tragedy no matter how you look at it. And the officers involved saying the same thing. The officers involved, based on what the chief have said, it's a tragedy for everyone. And that is something that was mentioned in that news conference last week. I'm going to play a soundbite from that now.
They're not bad people. There are people who have done some tough things. And there are people who are innocently impacted by it all. And so we got to find that way to be able to lift up everyone.
If the prosecutor felt that they would want to see a different investigation from a different body or entity, that would be on their call. But we haven't seen the investigation because of our distance from it. If information gets put out too soon and it is not verified, that does not help the investigation. It does not help our transparency with the public. It provides misinformation and can breed mistrust. We don't want to do that.
And that right there, I think, is important. That word mistrust. I think there's been things, and I'm just taking the top off the can at this point. We've done reporting over several years where there has been stories reporting that has fueled mistrust in the police department in Elkhart. We have done that reporting. We have followed up reports on certain things that have happened over the years in a city that has been beleaguered by mistrust in police. And that is something, as a journalist, I will say to you. If you're just new to this area, or if you never lived in Elkhart, you can look up the stories. They can speak for themselves. I'm not going to get into specifics of the stories and the reports that our station has done over several decades when it comes to police and law enforcement in Elkhart County. And I think you heard that word. They are trying to be as transparent as possible, according to the police chief, which is why they can't put out at the time last week any information, because they didn't want to say something that they view would be wrong or could be looked at and overanalyzed or scrutinized. And obviously rightfully so to people who want answers, but over scrutinized. And then obviously that becomes an issue of fact, transparency, you get it. There are a lot of people in that community right now who are skeptical still. There are a lot of people, even the prosecutor said it in this, there are people who are going to be skeptical as to what happened. What's important in this, though, I think this tells the story. Based on what we just read to you, this 3-page document, there are still questions we don't have answers to. And those questions are fair questions from people in the community. There are people in the community who may be watching this right now who are saying, okay, well, who shot first? That's a fair question, because we don't know. There are people who are out in the community who want to see body-worn camera. That is a fair expectation, because those body-worn cameras are there for a reason. And maybe that could shed some light on a situation where there are very few answers right now, right? And so I think all those things, two things can be true at once in a room where no one is in, right? And I think that's the speculation then comes into play when people don't have answers. And I think that's the argument from the prosecutor's office on this side of things. On this side of things, that says things take time, you have to be patient, don't dip into misconceptions. And then you get into the threats of the officers who weren't involved. Then you get to the threats of the victims' families and families who weren't involved. And so you got this etch-a-sketch that's been shaken based off of the lack of information, or at least visible information, in a world where people want to see things for what they are. And in this case, there are cameras involved, obviously. That is confirmed. We don't know if every officer involved have their camera on. We don't know that. We don't know what camera is on. We don't know what we will see. But there's obviously body-worn camera video that has been looked at and continue to be looked at as part of this investigation. And people want to see that. And that is based on what we're hearing as journalists, that is the one thing people want to see, because we live in a world where we have seen video, and yet and still there have been news conferences, press releases, and what have you that have said contrary to what you see. And I think that's where the frustration is coming from, based on people that I've spoken to in that community who want to get the facts but also want to see them for themselves. And so, again, this is a lot of information here. The top line, if you're just joining us here, from Elkhart, is that there is not going to be any release of any new video. There's not going to be any release of body-worn camera video. But there are several paragraphs in this news release that is devoted to people spreading speculative information. That is a quote. The victim's family should be allowed to grieve with privacy and dignity after this terrible tragedy. The city of Elkhart has shared numerous email and social media accounts, as well as voicemail messages that have been received, including threats of violence toward police in the community and demonstrating a profound amount of bias and preconceived ideas. So you've got that as well. So you've got a lot that is happening, but still a lot that is unanswered. And that is something that we will continue to pursue here in this newsroom, at least. And as soon as we get that information, we will pass it along to you. But the big news out of this is that we now know there was a passenger who we believe, based on this, who we believe to be the victim in this, who got out of a car with a gun in hand, based on this news release. And based on that news release, he shot at officers. We do not know who shot first. We do not know how many shots were fired. We do not know any of that information. That has not been included in this. We do not know what was observed by the officer. It mentions that the officer saw the car, went up to the car, saw a driver and people who he believed to be minors, and observed other law enforcement related things that yielded or resulted him calling back up. Whatever he observed, we don't know what he observed. That is what we know. That is the new information that we have based on this 3-page news release released, this update from Vicki Becker's office, the prosecuting attorney of Elkhart County. We're going to have the very latest on this and several other stories and breaking developments on our newscast starting at 5 o'clock with Caroline and George. And then Lauren and I will see you at 6 o'clock on WNDU as well. We'll be back here, obviously, wherever you're streaming and watching us with any new updates related to this or any other stories we're following throughout the day.